Welcome. Thanks for being here. I've spent a sum I'm not going to say out loud on the most ridiculous souvenir there is. A year I was born too late to attend. 5 bottles from one house and 3 more from another. Everyone a ticket to a time with the door shut. August of 1400. A convent kitchen in 1695. A French court that lost its head, and somewhere around the point where the credit card statement lands, I started asking a question I probably should have asked before bottle 3. What am I actually buying? Not the fragrance. I know what a fragrance is. The promise stamped on the box. A specific dead afternoon handed back. What is that worth? And is any of it even real? I'm the one who's supposed to be able to tell the real from the rest, so I ran the test on my own skin, and it didn't go the way I expected. 2 houses sell me that promise, and they keep it in completely opposite ways, and I took both tours the same week, and the answer came back stranger and happier than the one I'd packed for. Start with the thing every perfume like this is quietly built around. There is a year you want to stand in. Not read about, stand in. Breathe in. Be there for one afternoon. You can't ever because it's gone. And gone is the one condition money has never solved. People have thrown everything at it. Paintings, novels, those open-air museums with a man in wool churning butter who will not break character for love or money. Every one of them is somebody refusing to accept a closed border. Perfume has an unfair advantage in this game. Smell walks straight past the part of you that knows better and sets you down inside a scene before you've agreed to go. So a bottle claiming to be 1400 is not really selling you a smell, it's selling you the trip. And there are only 2 honest ways to run that trip. Rebuild the vanished room so faithfully a person can walk through it, or find something that made it out of the country before the borders closed and let them hold it. So 2 houses, 1 on each method. And the first house is Arquiste, and it is run wonderfully by a man who is not a perfumer at all. Carlos Huber is an architect who went and got a master's in preservation. The discipline of bringing lost buildings back without faking them, and he grew up in Mexico City in a gloriously tangled family, Polish and Russian and Spanish and Greek, all at one dinner table, which is his standing answer to anyone expecting him to bottle a stereotype. He fell into this by reading. Deep in the primary sources on French court life, he kept bumping into scent. The idea would not let him sleep, so he took it to a perfumer and started building rooms out of air. His method is pure generosity once you stop being suspicious of it. He picks an exact moment, researches its flowers and rituals down to the face powder, writes a long brief and hands it to a perfumer. And for the bottles I own, that perfumer is a Mexican nose named Rodrigo Flores-Roux, who happens to be the man who taught Huber fragrance in the first place on Tuesday evenings after work for the better part of a year. Then Huber does the thing that ought to be insufferable and is instead disarming. He publishes the reading list, every book for every bottle. Nanban's runs to 13 titles. He's not hiding the guesswork. He's showing his homework, and he's inviting you to come and stand in the room he built from it. So walk it with me. His August of 1400 is a temple in the Aztec capital, buried under flowers. Flor y Canto 2012 at a perfume. Notes here are Mexican acacia, marigold up top, a heart of tuberose absolute, magnolia, and red and white plumeria over copal, incense, benzoin, and Mexican vanilla. It opens like an altar, heaped past sense. It's a cool cloud of white flowers over the mentholated smoke of copal, the marigold threaded through the flower of the dead long before it was the flower of a launch. And then it does something quieter than the drama promises, because the copal never really climbs. The marigold waves once and is gone, and what stays for the afternoon is a cool, well-mannered tuberose going slowly sweet before it softens into Mexican vanilla. It's an hour of real presence, then a scent that lives near the skin. And the sneer I might have reached for falls apart on my own wrist, because the man imagining a pre-conquest festival is a Mexican perfumer rebuilding his ancestors' world out of flowers that still grow in the gardens of south of Mexico City. It's not a costume. This is a grandson repainting a room in his own family's house, and the reviewers who track it call it restrained for a tuberose. A few true strokes of a temple rather than a photograph of one, moderate on both projection and length. Nanban is a galleon in 2016, a samurai ambassador sailing home with a hold full of the genuine cargo. So, Nanban, again created by Rodrigo Flores-Roux, 2015 eau de parfum, and the notes here are saffron, black tea, black pepper over myrrh, leather, coffee, osmanthus on a base of olibanum, sandalwood, and styrax. And if I spray this on skin, and aren't these bottles lovely, it wears like the dark of that ship's hold. Saffron and pepper on the top, and then hide and myrrh and a coffee note that comes and goes like a rumour, dazzling and kaleidoscopic for about an hour before it furls down into a long, quiet skin scent of smoked wood and faded leather. And my own chemistry gets a vote in the opening, deciding whether the top reads as elegant osmanthus or warm animal hide, and it reads as elegant osmanthus. The materials in the bottle rarely were the cargo of that voyage, which makes it the stop that comes closest to touching something true. The reviewers file it as the most archival of the five, strong for its first hour and then intimate and close, a story carried rather than told. Misfit is 1877 in Marseille. Patchouli caught at the exact moment it stopped being chic. So, also created by Rodrigo Flores-Roux in 2019, and the notes are lavender, Calabrian bergamot, angelica, carrot seed over akigala wood, ambrette, styrax, and Bulgarian rose on patchouli and tolulabdanum and tonka. And I absolutely, as you can see, I rather love this fragrance. Let me spray it on my hand here. The joke is a patchouli scent that smells almost nothing like patchouli. It's smoky lavender and bitter bergamot, giving way to a polished, radiant, ambery rosewood that's so well behaved, I sometimes can't find the patchouli in it at all. And it glows off my skin for 10 or 12 hours easy. And the thing I love is buried in the note list. Huber built the smell of 1877 partly out of akigala wood, a woody molecule that Givaudan grew out of leftover patchouli that didn't exist until this century, which is the whole method admitting itself out loud. You rebuild a lost afternoon with whatever is on your bench today, the way every historical novel gets typed on a laptop the century in question never met. And the reviewers who track it praise it as easy and radiant and long-lasting. The modern molecule confession is the recurring charm. Venice Rococo is, oh, look at this. I do love this. It's almost empty. Can you see that? Is September 1757. And it is the strange one because for once, Arquiste isn't only guessing. It's built on surviving 18th century cosmetic formulas, the actual face powder a woman of that room would have worn. And Rodrigo Flores-Roux created it in 2024. The notes are Roman chamomile, Turkish rose water, hawthorn, and aldehydes over a poudre a la maracala cord, orange flower, black violet, Indian cumin on an animalic amber, Iris germanica, a civet accord, and vintage jasmine, built on surviving 18th century cosmetic formulas. Let me spray it over here. I must probably end up using the last of it on my hand, in fact. And for once, I can smell the difference. It opens as a vast, soft cloud of pressed, compact powder lifted by cool aldehydes, a silvery iris cutting through, and then the powder unfolds in slow motion onto a fluffy rose and an inky violet with a very warm animal thread underneath. It's like warm skin under a satin dress, and it runs for hours on me, and it throws real sillage, which is rare for something this refined. And the room it is dated to was a noblewoman's private salon with a removable tile set into the entrance floor as a peephole, so she could see who was arriving before letting herself be found, in a century where a woman was looked at for a living. The powder I would have read as pure decoration was the veil she chose, and the reviewers file it as softly animalic, powdery, retro modern floral. It's elegant with a touch, or should I say maybe an edge of eroticism, and it's only polarizing depending on how much powder you can love. So set that bottle beside the others and the whole question tightens, because here the research house holding a real surviving formula, and it still had to imagine the rest of the room around it. One more, and it's the warmest in the house. Nocturnality, Rodrigo Flores-Roux. The notes here are latex, neoprene, pepper, and hyrax over black leather, Bulgarian rose and resins on styrax, and patchouli, castoreum civet, and atlas cedar. And let me spray it over here. So the latex and the rubber that sounds so transgressive on the website turn out to be a textural wink. It's a gleam laid over a smooth, sociable black leather, and I could genuinely wear this to dinner. And the animalics kept blended and polite. It's the club arriving as atmosphere instead of assault. And this is the one that isn't researched from a library at all. It's drawn from the life of the man who composed all of these fragrances, Rodrigo Flores-Roux. It's a portrait of his own youth. And the reviewers on this one are still catching up since it's barely a year old, but it reads solid and close on the skin. The last one returns near the end because it is the only room in the house that I could fact check with a phone call. The second house takes the other road. Oriza L. Legrand doesn't rebuild the room from research. It kept a piece of the actual country, mostly. Its story is real, which is the first delight, and it's exactly as slippery as this whole subject deserves. The shop opens in 1720, and the name, Oriza L. Legrand, doesn't arrive for another century and a bit in the 1850s when a man called Louis Legrand puts it over the door. It was, by the house's own telling, a perfumer to the court of Louis XV, who was 10 years old at the time. So wear the royal glamour lightly. Its first real fame came from a face cream it sold under the name of a celebrated courtesan who'd been dead for 15 years. And from the very first success, this was a house that understood the name does the selling and the thing behind it is negotiable. So the founding product is rice powder. Oriza is the Latin name of rice. The cheapest thing in the pantry climbed onto the most expensive skin in Europe. The entire joke of luxury handed to you in one word. The family name reaches all the way to Marie Antoinette. The shop doesn't. The Queen's real perfumer was a Fagion, but a different Fagion in a different shop under a different name. So even here, 3 centuries ago, what travels is the name and not quite the thing. That gap keeps opening. So by the 1860s, a man named Antonin Reynaud had turned the house into an industrial marvel, the first steam-powered perfume factory in France. 20,000 square meters of it, most of the output shipped abroad. The royal warrants came in from the 1860s onward, France and Russia and eventually Italy, and the Baccarat crystal in the top prize at the Paris World's Fair, by the house's own account, came later, around the turn of the century. The house I'm about to love for selling the past spent its whole first life inventing the future. And then it died, and not the romantic way. The company that owned it was wound up in 1939, finished off by the 1929 crash that took down grand houses everywhere. And the perfumes stopped after 1940, but it was money that killed it, not the war. Then, silence. 70 years, a name asleep in a drawer. But this is where it gets joyful. 15 years ago, 2 Frenchmen bought the sleeping name and went into the archive, and they found the box. The recipe books for a house that had made more than 300 perfumes across its life, of which maybe 80 were in good enough shape to consider bringing back. And one of them, Franck Belèche, came out of film and television and loves this the way you love a thing you weren't supposed to end up doing. The other, Hugo Lambert, spent 20 years designing the shops and the boxes for the big niche houses, Diptyque and L'Artisan. The window dresser is the one who signs the perfumes now. Where exactly his hand stops and the grass slabs begin, the house stays quietly vague, which is on brand for everything else in the story. And they were honest from the start about the one thing that turns out to matter most in this whole film. They couldn't bring these scents back to the letter. Belèche said so plainly years ago. A note-for-note reproduction wouldn't have been, or should I say would have been, impossible. Partly because the old raw materials are gone, and partly, and this is the better reason, because a literal period piece would just smell nice and say nothing. A museum behind glass. So he didn't photocopy 1914. He translated it. He worked from the old recipes and from old full bottles, and he tracked down, or should I say from old full bottles, he tracked down to smell against, and he made something a person could actually wear now, which means that the relic house from its very first day, was rebuilding, not resurrecting. Remember that when we get to the wrist. Chypre Mousse is the one I reach for when I want to prove the point. It's a 1914 formula reworked and released and credited to Hugo Lambert. And the notes here are wild mint, fennel, clary sage over oak moss, galbanum and fern on vetiver, pine, mushroom, hummus, roasted chestnut, and leather. And I love this. You know, green and almost edible up top. It's kind of a cold snap of mint and cut sap, and then the floor gives way, and I'm standing on wet forest ground. It's damp and moss and black earth with a mushroom under the bark, and there's smoke somewhere in the trees, drying to a warm, leafy blur with roasted chestnut hours later. And 12 hours and up on me, an all-day thing, and grown adults genuinely come undone over this one, and the reviewers file it as the critical darling of the house, near universally adored, and it's the only divider being how much forest floor mushroom you want on your skin. So Rêve d'Océan is a real archive revival, and the one I'm going to buy for myself. It's a 1900 formula worked and released in 2012. And the notes here are frankincense, pepper, and pine over cinnamon, benzoin, opopanax, tonka, and gaiac on tolu, sandalwood, labdanum, amber, and musk. And reviewers note that it's cold church incense going warm. It's dusty and peppered opening, which reviewers call an old monastery library, burning off within minutes into cinnamon and sweet myrrh and amber, and apparently it's nutty and soft by the third hour and close to the skin the whole way. It's a cathedral folded into a bottle. The reviewers file it as an incense flagship. It's moderate, close, 6 or 7 hours, fairly linear, and you have to love the inside of a church. So here we have Louis 25, and my pronunciation may be off. It's also credited to Hugo, and the notes here are pink pepper, mandarin over white carnation, absolute white carnation, iris, rose, clove, on rice powder. There's white musk in this, as well as white honey and woods. And this, honestly, might be the most on the nose. Hang on, where are you? Where are you? The most on the nose bottle I own. It's a carnation named for the very king whose court the house was born under. It's dusted with the rice powder the house takes its name from, and it opens cold as ice. It's a cutting, peppered, almost metallic carnation with a clove bite and a dab of spiced orange, and it's sharp enough to make me sit up. And then the ice thaws into a cool cloud of carnation and iris over that soft retro rice powder. And look, some people find the powder dated. I find it the whole point. A flower-wearing 18th-century makeup. It lasts a good long while and drifts rather than shouts. And the reviewers get split on performance, weak on some skins, long with moderate to heavy sillage on others. It's kin in spirit to Serge Lutanz's Vitriol de Ouillet. I'm saying that wrong, aren't I? It's just powderia. The other one on my shelf is its warm opposite. This is Jardin d'Amide. It's a 1990, or should I say 1909 formula that's been reworked and released in 2013. And here, the notes are old rose, orange blossom, iris powder over Florentine iris, wild violet, wisteria and carnation on honey, almond, tonka, and musk. And while this one runs cold, this one is a whole Belle Epoque vanity table of a perfume. Let me spread over here. It opens on a peppery geranium and old rose that tips almost at once into powder, an expensive, soapy rose, violet, and iris powder over honey and almond and tonka. And it's the kind of thing a grande dame wore to be swooned at across a room. And it's the most emphatically old-fashioned bottle the house sells, and one of the most tenacious. An all-day cloud that lingers on a scarf for a week, and wear it. And I'm not so much visiting 1909 as being upholstered in it. The reviewers worn the powder reverse away and crown it for everyone else. And as you can tell, I love powder. So this is the house as it's most unapologetically dated, which makes it the house at its most honest. And look at what these houses are, stripped of the lovely boxes. They are businesses that watched an entire industry sprint toward the next drop and the faster launch and quietly bet the opposite way. They sell the old, and they can charge a premium for it because the old is the one thing you cannot manufacture more of at any price. We've reached a moment where the scarcest luxury on the shelf is a vanished afternoon, a year nobody can revisit. That's not a fact about a perfume. It's a fact about us. We started selling the past beautifully, at scale, right about the time we stopped feeling sure of the future. And under that sits the strange one, stranger than a ban. Put chypre mousse back on. Part of why it stops people is oak moss, and everyone assumes oak moss was outlawed, and it wasn't. You can buy it today. What you can't buy is the old one. The rules cap the fraction of it that irritates skin, so the oak moss on sale now is a reduced version. The same material stripped of part of its body. Multiply that across a whole shelf of ingredients, the mosses, the musks, the industry is quietly rebuilt for safety, and you get the real situation. The past isn't being banned, it's being reformulated out from under us while it keeps its name. Even the house, with the genuine recipe, is chasing a smell the world has agreed to stop making. And then look at how they sell all of it, because the packaging gives the whole game away. You know, both houses put the entire sale on the outside of the box before you smell a drop. Oriza wraps in costume, patterned, period paper, and apothecary flacons in a shop staged as 1910. So the box whispers that this has survived, and Arquiste wraps in citation, a clean modern bottle with the date on the label and a published biography running to 13 books. Where is the Nanban? Here. 13 books for a single cent. So the presentation insists that this is accurate, and neither claims about the smell. And the chill of it is that it works before your nose does. Tell a person they're about to smell a temple in 1400 and their nose goes looking for it and obligingly finds it. The label writes the scene and the nose files the review it was handed. And the box does half the perfuming. And the story's printed right there on the outside. One house in costume and one in footnotes. So here is what the pavement leaves me with. The border closes a little further every year, and the materials of the past are leaving faster than any archive can hold them, and nobody gets the dead air, not the researcher, not even the two men with the real recipe. And in front of that, two small houses, run by hand with no outside investors, by their founders' own accounts. They keep building the best version of a lost afternoon they are still allowed to build. One from research and one from a rescued recipe already halfway to a guess. And both of them out of love and out of the same shrinking cupboard of things we're still permitted to use. This is not a con. It's the most human errand there is. Somebody refusing, on your behalf, to let a whole year go silent. One exception, and it's the sweetest. Nocturnality, the Arquiste, drawn from a living perfumer's own youth, is the single bottle in either house pulled from a life, still here to be asked. Everything else is a translation of a witness who's gone. This one has a witness on the payroll, which is maybe why it feels like the most, like it's being somewhere real. So what am I keeping? Not the past, nobody sold me that. I'm keeping a shelf full of small, expensive, hand-built refusals to let a year vanish without a smell. And the fact that I can't tell the rescued ones from the invented ones is not the flaw in the purchase. It's the tender whole point of it. And the difference between the research house and the relic house, the thing I walked in certain was the whole story, turns out to be the least interesting thing about either. You know, the country stays closed, it always will, and it loses a little of its air every year while we argue about the boxes. But somebody stood at the edge of it, twice, in two different ways, and handed me a lungful anyway, and I got to breathe a year I was born too late for. There are worse things to spend a life's disposable income on. I've looked and I've not found one. You cannot go yet. That's the one rule the place, and it never bends. So the next time a bottle promises you a year with the door shut, don't waste the question on whether it's the real thing or the beautiful guess, because your nose can't tell, and the answer wouldn't change what you're holding. Ask the one that matters. Ask whether somebody stood at that closing border and loved a lost afternoon enough to hand you its air before the last of it goes. These two did. Two different ways, and I'm going to keep showing up at that border for exactly as long as they run the tour. If any of this landed, the like and the subscribe are the two buttons that keep these tours running. So do press them, and if you want the longer version, there's a Substack under the same name as all this, the Perfumed Perspective, where I go long on the houses and the history an episode only has room to gesture at, and post the bottles that never make the final cut. Subscribe there too, and I'll meet you in your inbox between the forms.